Very good evening to one and all. International Council for Circular Economy welcomes you to the fourth episode of the third season of our Circular Chat, which is focused on the biggest challenge we as a global community face today, that is climate change. The Circular Chat is an initiative by ICCE to develop and promote the idea of a circular economy. The chats aim to engage key actors to mobilize system solutions at scale, and in that regard, we wish to bring to you the opinions and immense knowledge of leading experts in the field of climate change and the various facets it covers. My name is Disha, and it is my honor to introduce our guest speaker for the day, Ms. Pallavi Sharma. Pallavi ma'am has a master's in climate science and policy in India from Tata Energy Research Institute. She has worked in IIT Delhi on climate data analysis and heat stress and was chosen as an exchange scientist to work at the Potsdam Institute of Climate Research. She has also worked at the National Institute of Urban Affairs in the domain of climate action, cities, energy, and sustainable consumption and production. She continues to contribute independently through her research based articles. It is wonderful to have you with us here today, ma'am. Thank you so much for coming today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
On
Glad to
that
be a
note,
part here.
thank you, ma'am. On that note, I would like to begin. On the topic of the topic of today's chat is race to net zero. So, ma'am, Prime Minister Narendra Modi committed to a net zero emission target by 2070. Many big companies have followed suit. In your opinion, is there a linked chain of actions that can be taken for a sustainable road to net zero emissions?
Thank you, Disha. Thank you for the question. I'll probably break down this question into three parts. The first part would be what led to net zero, what were the changes that happened, and what are the current actions, and add my bit about my opinion in the end. So let's sit in the time machine, go back 7 years to the Paris Agreement in 2015. So it was seen as a bright spot in the climate negotiations because after Kyoto Protocol, finally, nationally, there was a commitment for action. But in the subsequent 5 to 7 years and 2 years because of the global pandemic, nothing really changed. So these commitments really didn't materialize into some action on the ground. In fact, all the leading reports from the United Nations Environment Program, the IPCC actually said if we stick to the nationally determined contributions, we would be bombing our planet by a factor of 2.8 to 3.5 degrees, which is massive. Uh, and so there was a global doom. And in 2018, International Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, actually brought out a report which said 1.5-degree emission pathways. So it said three main things. The first one being if we do not want to exceed our warming by 1.5 degrees Celsius, globally, we should lower our emission by 45% from our 2010 levels by 2030 and lower our CO2 emissions by a period of 2050 to 2065 and other greenhouse gas emissions by within the period of 2070 to 2085. Now, so that was a document actually gave hope that if we can do that, we can protect the irreversible damage. So what this was like really picked up by the United Nations Framework Conference on Climate Change, UNFCCC, that body, and so a lot many countries came on board. So European Union, the then United Kingdom, then a lot many small island nations, and then even China. And so the even US that had earlier like got out of the Paris negotiation came back on board, and there was pressure. I mean, internationally, and also we were talking about a domestic pressure about really what should we be doing. We haven't really, as India as a nation hasn't really contributed to the problem, and we're still developing. We don't know what pathway would we be taking. Should we really commit to this net zero? Should we comply with the pressure? And as you rightly said, our Prime Minister made a global pledge with his Panch Amrit strategies and the net zero commitment by 2070. So it really didn't stop there. This actually really moved to open the field to a lot many players. Now there are coalitions formed for ocean action, for small and medium enterprises, for insurance companies, for finance companies, for energy companies, and also there is a coalition named Trace to Net Zero. And actually, when you look at this coalition, it is very interesting. So it has currently about 250 organizations, 212 or so companies that you mentioned, right? Uh, and 66 cities, 12 investors, or something of this number. So this coalition menu has steps. When you actually join this coalition, you have to, according to what vertical you choose in, you have to make commitments about a short-term period, a medium-term period, and a long-term period. So it's interesting to see that the organizations that I mentioned about has like 80 to 70% academic institutes. So it's actually saying that we're just not teaching, but we're also preaching what we're doing. So they have committed to net zero. Their cities as small as Bir, Gondia, Latur, Udgir, especially in the state of Maharashtra, which have joined the coalition. So this
Mhm.
is the current net zero scenario, and I think it's a real positive dimension. It's opened the floor to many cities, and it's a change that we're thinking about our future.
Right, ma'am. Thank you so much for answering that, ma'am. It was a very, very detailed and informative answer, in my opinion. Now, coming back to the topic. So, ma'am, the term offsetting is often associated, carbon offsetting is often associated with the topic of race to net zero. Do you think offsetting is really moving towards net zero? Can you shed some light on this particular term?
Sure, thank you, Disha. To understand offset, you probably have to understand what this net zero really is. So, it is a state where what you're emitting into the environment is balanced out by what you're absorbing or the reduction that you make in your global greenhouse gas emissions. So, and probably like really explaining it to a layman, it'd be okay. If I have two mangoes, I give you two, I'm left with a zero empty hand. This is absolutely zero. But what is a net zero is if I have two mangoes, I give you two, and somebody else gives me two. So my transaction is zero, but I still have two mangoes. But this is net zero. So this is a position where you're not emitting more, but you're not also reducing. So this is the net position of it. Now talking about what the reduction and absorption really mean and how can we do that. So reduction can be anything. It can be energy efficiency, waste reduction, localization of resources, applying the circular economic principles. So all these paths would lead to reduction, increasing the carbon sinks through forests. So these are paths to reduction. But for absorption, currently we have just one, we've been talking about carbon capture and storage. That is a technology which doesn't really have a scalability, but we're hoping but in the next decade or so it will be. And it has two variants. You're capturing carbon from the fossil fuels, or you're capturing carbon from natural industrial processes. Like, for example, through converting pulp to paper, there's an industrial process. So while that process happens, you capture the carbon. So this is the complete thing about offsets.
Right, ma'am. Thank you for answering that, ma'am. So I understand that a lot of coalitions have been formed in the world in order to achieve this race to net zero. So coming to the collective efforts of the world in this race, meeting net zero targets needs all actors, including the non-government bodies, to participate in the movement towards decarbonization. Can you perhaps elaborate how our listeners, which include members in academia, industry, and students alike, can join this campaign?
Sure, Disha. And I really agree with you. So, as you said, it's opened the coalition to so many actors, and all the actors really need to make a concerted effort for net zero to be truly possible. Uh, but beginning with an optimistic note. So United Nations Environment Program, the International IEA, International Energy Agency, so many of the agencies actually said if we actually abide by what the pledges the world has made, we can limit our warming to 1.5 to 1.8 degrees. Only if all the actors really comply with it. So, what do, understanding what decarbonization is, why are we emphasizing only on carbon, uh, and what lies ahead? So, we've been emitting carbon while we respire. Why are we so emphasizing that much on carbon now? When I was thinking about it, I thought about my chemistry classes and the titration experiments, right? When you pour in something to the burette, and when the limit really reaches, or the concentration really reaches, your concentration changes and the color changes. Similarly, probably when the sun sets, it's immediately dark. So we have probably reached a concentration, the sunset concentration, that if we don't do action right now, there would be a complete change in the environment. So that's why we're
Mhm.
thinking and working on carbon. But talking about how are we consuming this carbon? So, so majorly when we do some action, when consume the energy, we are emitting carbon. Uh, Talking about in the Indian context, in India, we are consuming about 75% current energy is supply is fossil based, and 25% is non-fossil based. So the Prime Minister, in his commitment on Panchamrit, actually mentioned that by 2030 we would be using 50% of our energy from non-fossil based sources. So from now 75 to 25, there would be a transition. So this decarbonization and transition is telling about this phase. Now, uh, so where are we consuming this energy? We are consuming this energy 40% in our industries, about 30% in residences, and 16% in transport. So each of them have a different source of fuel, right?
Agree.
So while we talk about this transition, what would be the steps that we would have to take? So the government has to think about this. So, for example, in the next 5 years, are we going to shut down the new? I mean, not give money to the new coal sectors. In the next 15 years, like phase out the ones existing coal, and eventually like bring in energy efficiency into the industry sectors. Similarly, for the transition towards in transport, how are we thinking in terms of mobility, looking for options right now, like electric vehicles for the small vehicles, then for heavy vehicles, then railways, and then airways. So what is the kind of strategy we're thinking at? We've right now pledged for it, but we don't really have a strategy. So the prime role of the government would be to come up with a strategy, give out pointers that is clear, just not to the consumer, that is we the citizens, but to the foreign investor, and also talk about how they're going to be coordinating within the different tiers of government. So the central, federal level, the state, and the local governments, how are they going to share the proceeds? So that would be, and how would be navigating the three levers that they have: the financial, the executive, and the legislative, to reach the
Mhm.
goals that they are. So that would be the part of the government. When I talk about the part of academia, as I thought, as I said, um, the academy has a very big role to play because it's a transition that is never seen before. So they
Yes.
need to think about how and why and what should you opt for. And when it comes to civil society, they are the people who have a presence on ground. They know the pulse of the people. So they have a great role in advocacy, as I think, and a role in capacity building. And oh yeah, for the industry, I would say that like it's just not the current industry, but there would be a change coming up. So
True.
we need to think about the new innovators, new financial models, new reverse logistic models, new circular designs, and the existing industries need to think about their direct, indirect, and emissions through their supply chain. So that would be the setup I think that would work.
Right, ma'am. I agree with everything you just said, and clearly, the race to net zero is something which requires very, very collective efforts, and it's going to be a long race. So, when we bring up the topic of race to net zero, we often hear climate experts and economists mention a term called carbon pricing, which may be unfamiliar to most of the population. So, can you please explain the concept a little bit and maybe mention complementary policies that can be taken along with it to ensure its successful implementation?
Sure, Disha. Okay, so as I said, why we talking about carbon now? Um, so carbon pricing is just adding an economic value to the damage that we're doing by emitting greenhouse gas emissions. So it is measured per metric ton of CO2 equivalent. So it just means if you go to a place 10 kilometers away and you ride a vehicle, you are emitting something. So that concentration is going to harm the environment. So, so how do you compensate for that cost? That is done by carbon pricing. It actually began with the Kyoto Protocol in 1997. So by now, the world has been practicing it. It has been in practice. And whenever there's cost, there's payments, there are always markets. So we already have, the world has established carbon markets. So at different levels, there are countries like about 600 schemes that are operating in these markets. There's a scheme for a federal level, a state level, not really in India, but in general. So, what are the schemes that are really picking pace? The first one is the emission trading scheme, which has, I mean, the European Union is being a champion in that. Then you have carbon taxes. Okay, I'll probably explain the emission trading scheme. So there are two main variants of emission trading scheme. Either you set a mark about how much emissions you can make. So any emission above this limit, you'll have to compensate with a price. Or you keep a lower mark that if you emit less than this, you will be able to get a credit for this. So this is the emission trading system, and you can trade these credits or pay for the credits. Uh, Likewise, there are scheme on carbon taxes that if you're emitting a polluting substance, you will be taxed. And then there are schemes around internal price. Yeah, so a lot many countries in India, even Tata, Infosys, Mahindra, these kind of companies are opting for internal price, carbon pricing. So what it really is it gives you a measure of how to think in terms of environment and how to add value. So for example, I'm a company and a very climate conscious, environment conscious company. I would want to invest in either a renewable energy plant or opt for energy efficiency in my own firm. So how do I make that decision? For that, they have an internal pricing. They've set a price for carbon for themselves. And then, and there are also result-based carbon financing schemes, which really means if I'm funding a project for you, you'll have to reach a particular baseline for and lower your emissions to that mark to get further financing. So there are many variants to it. But on the India level, we don't really have a very elaborate carbon uh, market setup. But though there are policies like the perform, achieve, and trade policy, which sets a limit, and if you emit below that, you get an energy saving certificate. There's a coal cess that
Right,
goes
ma'am.
to the National Clean Energy Fund. Then there is renewable purchase obligations that the distribution companies that are really state owned have to purchase, which means they have to power their emissions from, I mean, emissions, not emissions, but their energy targets also from renewable energy. So what I think is, I think I'm in advocacy of multiple variants. Do what it suits you, although it's administratively heavy task to do, but
Right, ma'am.
and yeah, there are three main things that you can really uh, think of. It's like defining a purpose and defining clear benchmarks on what you're doing, what you're achieving, what kind of carbon you're making, and communicate that well. Then regularly monitor and manage their.
Rightly said, ma'am. There are so many schemes in the world that are in place in order to achieve this race to net zero. So, in order to talk about achievements now, we know that countries such as Bhutan and Suriname have already achieved carbon negative status.
Hmm,
Understanding that one of these nations is a close neighbor of ours, that is Bhutan, what
hmm.
lessons do you think India can learn to achieve the same?
I'm glad you mentioned that. Yes, I think you can learn from everybody, and yeah, a close neighbor is, of course, country you should learn from.
Sure.
See, specifically because you are a nation that is very small, you don't have a very high GDP, you've not made emissions, and we were probably saying that domestically that we've not made emissions. Uh, but still, you are on the path and giving a signal that I'm in the path and I'm in the circle. I want to reduce emissions. But having said that, we have to actually look at their composition. So Bhutan and Suriname, both of them have like 60 to 70% of their geographic area under forest. They are dependent on very basic agriculture or fisheries, and they do have industries, but not that majorly. So what we can really learn from them is how do they not give in to the greed? How did they value the natural endowments that they really have? How did they manage the communities around what they have? But saying that we can really compare at the federal level India and Bhutan, that doesn't really go well. It's actually apples and oranges because India has like one sixth of the world population. We have massive industries, manufacturing sectors, and we're like self-dependent in terms of food requirements.
True,
So
ma'am.
that
I
way we can't
completely
make a
agree.
comparison.
I completely agree with you, ma'am. That was actually a very good fact that you mentioned. So, ma'am, as per facts, between 2001 and 2020, India as a country has lost 20 million hectares of forest cover. So, talking about biodiversity, the need to escalate biodiversity is an urgent one. Do you think we're doing enough in that context to revamp the losses that we have suffered?
I agree with you, Disha, again on this, and not getting into the statistics here. Uh, but we committed in 2015 about that we lower, I get the carbon sinks through forest to reduce 2.5 to 3 billion gigatons of carbon. We have achieved that. But having said that, I agree. There are like reduction in forest. So even the green cover, the things that are being calculated are next to the highways, and these are not really forests. So even one of the drawbacks of this net zero is that it changes focus from adaptation or resilience. What really actually matters. I mean, while you're making the transition, you're also losing on stuff. So we have to really think about, are we just focused upon meeting the international commitments that we're making, or we actually really thinking about what we have and how do we protect that, even if there is not a binding agreement to it. So, but we also hear a lot of news and stories about conservation of tigers or rhinoceros, but the question that we need to ask is, even when they're the keystone species in their environments, why not protect the whole ecosystem and not just focus on one thing? So if you have a master plan for mobility, why not have a master plan for biodiversity? So I do think with the current changing environment, whatever we do is less, but to have a plan and strategy and look at the ecosystem approach would help us in a long way.
The line that you said that why not have a master plan for the entire biodiversity was a really good one, and I absolutely agree with you on that one, ma'am. Thank you so much for answering that question. It was a very detailed and a very informative one. Now, let me check if we have any questions in the live chat box on YouTube. And I would like to mention that our viewers are extremely happy and they're very much enjoying this chat and they appreciate all of the answers that you've given to us today. Just give me a second, ma'am. I'll just check if we have any questions. So, ma'am, we don't have any questions in the live chat box as of yet.
Mhm.
So, I think we can conclude the meeting. And I would like to say thank you so much for being with us here today. I would like to thank everyone who decided to join our live session today. We are very happy to share that ICCE is launching a journal on circular economy. This journal is in collaboration with the Indian Plastics Institute. We welcome you to attend the launch of the journal on 11th February at 11:30 a.m. The link for the same shall be put in the chat box. We will be back at the same time next week, and if you don't want to miss out on any updates or future conversations, do follow our social media pages and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Once again, thank you so
I
much.
would really want to commend you on the efforts you're doing. So ICC, the pace of your contribution and circular economy is actually agonistic of sectors. So I really like that one in the first chat you talked about your journal, then a global conference. So I really like you sticking to the subtitle you have, the educate and innovate. And good luck for you in that.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was so great to have you with us here today. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.